As we await the likely first ever indictment of a former U.S. president, the first indictment in American history, we are already seeing another first. Republicans in Congress, led by House Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan, using their power as congresspeople to act as quasi-defense attorneys for a former president in a potential criminal case. And not just in the court of public opinion, which, needless to say, is also happening. In addition to his normal Fox News hits, on Monday, Congressman Jordan took it upon himself, reportedly at the request of one of President Trump's lawyers, to send this letter demanding the testimony of Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, the prosecutor, of course, investigating Trump's alleged hush money payments. And what Congressman Jordan was asking for here, for a state prosecutor to testify before Congress, to lay out all of his evidence and internal communications about an ongoing criminal investigation in front of a bunch of allies of the very person that investigator might be trying to prosecute. Well, that is a five-alarm fire in terms of the separation of powers. It is what Congressman Jordan himself might call the weaponization of the federal government. Now, Mr. Bragg politely declined Chairman Jordan's request this morning, saying in a letter that Bragg's office will, quote, always treat a fellow government entity with due respect, and requesting a meet and confer to understand whether the committee has any legislative purpose. It sort of seems clear what the committee's purpose is. Now, unfortunately, Jim Jordan is not just some random letter writer. He is a congressman, and he is the chair of the House Judiciary Committee. He has subpoena power, and he is likely to at least try to use it. So exactly how District Attorney Bragg responds to these House Republicans and how Democrats respond, all of that really matters, because this is likely just the first indictment against President Trump. The odds are pretty good that the leading Republican candidate for president in 2024, that he will be actively fighting multiple criminal indictments while on the campaign trail. And that candidate seems to think so, too. Today, Trump called for all of the prosecutors in all of the investigations into him. He called for them to be removed from office. On Alvin Bragg specifically, Trump both referred to the black prosecutor as a Soros-backed animal and referred to his office as the Gestapo. And Trump used that charged language while criticizing calls for his followers to respond peacefully to this potential indictment. Trump is trying to reframe this narrative from being an investigation into his alleged crimes, and he is instead trying to make it an investigation into the investigators. And Republicans in Congress are using the power of the federal government to help him. Joining us now is Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin, ranking member of the House Oversight Committee. Congressman Raskin, thank you so much for being here. You are a scholar of the law. We have heard the phrase investigate the investigators many times in the Trump era, but this feels different. And is this even legal for Jim Jordan to ask Alvin Bragg to come before Congress in the middle of an open investigation?
Well, let's start with this. I mean, we actually have jurisdictional authority over the Department of Justice in the House Judiciary Committee, but it is very well established that even there, with the DOJ, where there's real jurisdictional oversight responsibility, that we cannot intervene in an ongoing case. Then you take it from the federal level to the state and local level, where we have no jurisdictional power over state investigative and prosecutorial authorities. And this is just unheard of and outrageous. It's clearly an attempt to elevate Donald Trump completely above the law, completely above the Constitution. And that's what's so scary about this. The GOP has turned into a messianic cult of personality around one guy who has proven himself to be a one-man crime wave, and they've all wrapped themselves in their careers and their destinies around Donald Trump.
It is staggering to me that Trump's lawyer, Joe Tacopina, reportedly suggested that the House Judiciary Committee do this, and they have in turn followed suit into what a morass that you, I think, rightfully suggest could be unconstitutional. And then there's the reality of if they actually did this, you told the Washington Post, and I agree with this, that it could completely backfire even if they managed to get Alvin Bragg up to the Hill. Can you talk about the ways in which Democrats see this as a potential danger zone for Republicans if they do, in fact, go through with all of this?
Well, Alex, the emperor has no clothes at any level. I mean, during the impeachment trial, the rhetoric of all the Republicans was, well, if there's a real problem, you don't need to impeach and convict him. Just prosecute him when he leaves office. That's fine. Now all of the prosecutors are saying there are these criminal offenses we want to research, and they say, how dare you prosecute a former president, someone who's put himself forward to run for president again? I mean, they will devise any argument to try to guarantee the total immunity and impunity of one Donald Trump. So they're taking us into completely unknown territory as a society today.
I do wonder, I mean, when you talk about terra incognito and new territory, it's not just what Trump is asking Congress to do in this sort of extrajudicial kind of fashion. It's also the threats that he is directing at prosecutors, and in particular, the Manhattan District Attorney, calling him a Soros-backed animal. And then today, the former president shared a post on Truth Social that is a link to an article that shows a picture of Trump holding a bat next to Alvin Bragg's face. I mean, does that rise to the level of a threat of violence against a prosecutor?
Well, some of the people who are in the D.C. jail right now as January 6th convicts or suspects are people who wielded baseball bats and batons and flagpoles and metal poles and other weapons like that. So Donald Trump is obviously sending a not very subliminal, subtle signal to his most avid followers out there. I trust that the good district attorney has sufficient security, but it's a very dangerous moment when you have people at his level giving license to violence and to violent attacks, including on law enforcement. I mean, this is something that we're going to be dealing with tomorrow when Marjorie Taylor Greene is going to be leading a delegation from the House Oversight Committee to go to the D.C. jail to visit the January 6th defendants who she describes as political prisoners, like Alexander Solzhenitsyn or Nelson Mandela in South Africa or Navalny today. These are not political prisoners. There are 20 of them there. 17 of them have been charged with assaulting federal officers, including with baseball bats and batons and Confederate flagpoles and spraying them with noxious chemicals and so on. Those are the people that they're going to visit tomorrow. And by the way, they are being treated just fine in D.C. jail. There are two facilities there. There's the central detention facility and there's a central treatment facility. They are in by far the better facility with open area. They're guaranteed 4 or 5 hours a day outside of their cells. They get to go outside, weather permitting. They have access to recreation. They have computer tablets available to them for more than 12 hours a day in an institution that's been fully accredited by the American Correctional Association. So they've got it pretty good as prisoners and detainees and suspects go. Now, some of them have still not pled guilty yet or been convicted of anything. They're entitled to the presumption of innocence. But a lot of the people that they're visiting tomorrow, I think 8 or 9 of them, have already pled guilty to serious charges like assaulting federal officers. And all of them are being charged with very serious offenses like seditious conspiracy, conspiracy to assault federal officers, staying in an excluded facility with a dangerous weapon, disobeying the officers, wielding weapons against officers and so on. So, my Republican colleagues don't talk about any single case. They will not name any of these people because they don't want the media looking into what they actually did. But I highly commend to you a report that was done by Just Security, which goes through the cases of the people who were actually there. And the media should keep that in mind when they're touring the facility tomorrow of these so-called political prisoners. And by the way, while they're calling for the release of political prisoners, I would love it if Marjorie Taylor Greene and Chairman Comer and Lauren Boebert would call for the release release of Alexei Navalny, who's a real political prisoner held by the war criminal Vladimir Putin in Russia right now for his stand against the corruption of the Russian government? Will they call for the release of a real political prisoner, Mr. Navalny? I challenge them to do that while they're calling for the release of many of these people who've already been convicted of violently assaulting our officers.
I think we know whether they are going to defy Putin and call for Navalny's release, but I sincerely appreciate A, the invocation of Alexei Navalny's name and the work he has done to try and bring justice and transparency to Russia, and also B, the invitation for Republicans to do the right thing. Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin, always good to see you. Thanks so much for your time tonight.